Susan, you ready to roll with this today? I am super excited for this one.
Born ready, Ryan.
You are
Let's
born
do
ready.
this
I've
thing.
I've looked at your story. I've done research. Boy, oh boy, you are born ready. You've been a high achiever since basically day one. We'll get there in just a moment. But I believe you are from closer to my neck of the woods. I'm from upstate New York. I'm in North Carolina now. You are
Yep.
in what, the Toronto area, correct?
Yeah. I actually grew up in Mississauga, which is a suburb of Toronto. But yeah, I was here for the first 14 of my years of my life. Then I was down in the States for about a decade playing hockey, as I'm sure we're going to talk about in a second.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I came back home to play professionally when the Women's Professional League first opened its doors back in the
Amazing.
day. Now we're selling out the Bell Center. I'm not sure if you're aware of what's going on in the women's hockey world, but they are like on the main stage now. But yeah, I've been back here in Toronto ever since.
That's amazing. I went to Buffalo, so I was only not like an hour, hour and a half away from you. So
Spent a lot of time down there,
yeah, I
a
can I
lot of
can definitely
hockey.
imagine. Where'd you live in
Yeah.
the States? I'm curious.
So I went down to one of those fancy boarding schools that you all have in New England at 14 in New Hampshire
Hmm.
specifically. And then I was down in New Jersey at Princeton for 4 years.
So you never really got to thaw out. You pretty much stayed in the Northeast the entire time.
Although anytime there would be a dusting of snow in New Jersey, they would close the shop down. So I feel like that was probably the most tropical of my experiences.
Yes, I don't miss those days. I'm in North Carolina now, and you're completely correct. Down here, you get a little bit of a flurry. It's shut everything down. Everybody grab their milk and eggs and close everything down and be ready to camp indoors for a while,
Hmm.
which is crazy to me. But yeah, we're
Me as
definitely
well.
gonna hit on your hockey story. As I mentioned, you are quite the high achiever. Like I said, I was doing my research on you, and with you being a coach for high performance, I was like, all right, let me look into this. You
Hmm.
are your credentials are amazing. So you're a high performance leadership coach, as I just mentioned. You're an author. You're founder and CEO of Elite High Performance Inc. You're also the host of the podcast, the Leadership Launchpad Project, and a member of the Forbes Coaches Council. It would have been shorter for me to list what you are not. But did I miss anything there?
You're making me blush. But no, I mean, listen, I am, and as we're going to see surely in this interview, one very passionate gal, just out trying to scream this stuff from the rooftops as far and wide as I possibly can when the world needs this type of intel more than it ever has, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think that probably is the more interesting aspect of my story is like why I am so fervently on this mission to try to affect change in these ways.
Yeah, what is your mission? I want to hit on that first.
Yeah, so at Team Elite, we say we're on a mission to change the way the game of life, leadership, and business is being played forever through something we have coined Leadership 2.0. This is the new school, neuroscience backed, data and research driven best practices here in 2024 in the leadership development space. But yeah, we really feel like we're highly differentiated in the way that we approach leadership development because we approach that through the leader's mindset. And why we're so confident about that approach, beyond the fact that we get such game changing results with some of the highest performing people and teams and companies on the planet, is that the Harvard Business Review actually just released this amazing batch of research where they looked at the 356 billion annual global dollars spent on this stuff and saw that a whopping 75% of it just was completely ineffective, meaning it did not impact a single damn result. The
Mm.
25% that did were the ones who focused on the leader's mindset. So we know that this has the power to change the game because it is the anomaly. It's the exception to the rule in the way that leaders are being developed. But we also are neuroscience backed. We don't understand how you affect behavior modification, leadership being a set of behaviors after all, unless you go to that step of death known as mindset. That's what is responsible for governing our behaviors, right? So yeah, we're very, very passionate about it, not only because we have something that we see works and has the potentiality to actually change the game in terms of our leaders' performance, but really because our approach is human centric, right? And this is the
Hmm.
thing that we are so passionate about eradicating on our mission, which is all this old school leadership 1.0, born out of the industrial era, all about the power over, right? Rather than awakening the power within. We just can't even believe that this is not the majority of how leaders are operating here in 2024 when we have this much research in neuroscience to prove what works.
Now
So yeah.
you say leaders.
Mhm.
Do you only work with leaders, or do you work with people who are perhaps followers and make them leaders? Like, what if someone's listening
Mhm.
to this? Or like, I don't know if I'm a leader. I don't know if I really want to be a leader.
Mhm.
I'm fine going to work and just kind of like someone telling me what to do and I black out. Like, do you ever work with those people? What kind of message do you have for them?
Yeah, so our whole mission really is focused on affecting change in the high achievers experience because
Hmm.
there's a marked difference between a high achiever and a high performer. I know you were calling me a high achiever there a second ago. That was my former life. And that's why I'm so passionate about serving this crowd, right? Because nobody understands a high achiever better than a freaking high achiever, right? Nobody would ever believe us when we say that all that striving on the outside is actually surviving on the inside. So, yeah, I think this is why I came out the gates of professional women's hockey so passionate to get on this mission. At first, I was really passionate about going back into the trenches of my sport because I saw, not only did I not get access to any of this intel until I accessed the top 1% of my sporting career, my academic career, um, but yeah, like nobody was talking to me about my mental health. Nobody along that entire gauntlet of high performance and all of that highly competitive environments that I was thrust into were ever even speaking to me about my emotions, right? Like I had
Hmm.
no clue until I had access, which again was limited to the top 1%. And I just couldn't believe that. To me, that was like criminal that that was the way that we were leading athletes. So when I first came out the gates, that's where I started with the high achieving athletes. I prop them up, get them into their like peak performance state, but then I would observe, I'd be sending them back into these 1.0 lead conditions. And then I also, around the same time, early in my career, I really started to see my high achieving professionals in the same light. I was like, wow, same set of performance principles, just in different arenas. And when I started to work with the high achieving professionals that wanted to get to leadership roles, but couldn't, right? Because their mental health wouldn't allow it, right? They just couldn't access that state that they needed to be in to be able to access levels of impact and influence like that. Yeah, I started to see the same thing. I would get them on side in terms of their strategies, send them back into their, 1.0 lead conditions, and it would all collapse in on itself. And that's when I decided for myself that I needed to gain access to the leader's mindset. That
Hmm.
being said, I have a team of 10 coaches around me. So we still try to serve the athletic crowd. We're still trying to serve our high achieving professionals for sure. But ultimately, we see that everybody is a leader. We see that I see what was going on in my sporting career and ascension. I was in self leadership. I just didn't know it. I just wasn't at the helm, you
Hmm.
know?
Hmm.
So, whether you're a high achieving professional or a high achieving athlete, I like to challenge them to think about themselves as leaders as well.
That's great. And so when you work with athletes, I want to hit on that for a moment. Do you kind
Mhm.
of consider it in the same realm of like a sports psychologist? Is that kind of similar? I know you're kind of shaking your head, maybe not, but I'm just thinking of athletes. It seems like year over year, if not decade over decade, kind of like the amount of pressure that is on these athletes, whether from internal or external. And now we have social media. So if like, if someone misses a free throw and it blows the
Goes
game,
viral.
they're getting death threats like
Mhm.
immediately. Like I can imagine in the 80s and 90s how much pressure was on them, and it just keeps getting larger and larger and larger. And now, like, it's great that a lot of these athletes are getting paid crazy money. Hopefully, the women's hockey is gradually getting there. I know the
Yeah.
WNBA is now gradually getting there.
Mhm,
But to live up to that contract, like the amount of
mhm.
pressure and all that kind of stuff, are these conversations you've had with the athletes that you've worked with as far as like dealing with all these external pressures and the internal pressures?
Oh, absolutely. I feel like it's both, right? The external environment largely informs the internal environment, and especially with a high achiever because their entire locus of control lives outside of themselves.
Mm,
Right? And so
mm,
that means that they're even more sensitive to the input from their external environment. So clearly, the higher you climb in your performance ascension, the more that becomes a problem. And I feel like
right.
this is why we see so much young talent that never even gets the shot at the big leads, right? Because they can't sustain the pressure that starts to build internally, and therefore their performance can't sustain, right? Because this is where we see them go into the tailspins, because they don't even have any understanding or awareness of how all of that is impacting them, especially when it comes to their broken strategies. So yeah, I think when I'm working with the athletes, yeah, it's similar to sports psychology, I guess, because we're like talking about the psychological realm, which is where the mindset lives. It's different in that the model is coaching, and I was very, very, very specific about why I chose to go the coaching route rather than the psychology route, because I studied this in my undergrad.
Hmm.
But to me, and I know because like this is how I got exposed to some of this stuff is when I finally started getting exposure to sports psychs. But for me, I don't know, like if that ever really landed in the same way that it landed when my coaches were saying things. Because for me, a sports psych is great, right? In terms of their understanding of all of these types of academic principles. But for me, the most important piece was, do you actually know what it's like in these trenches? Do you
Hmm.
have that street cred? Like you have that experiential understanding?
Makes a
And
difference.
so
Hmm.
it totally makes a difference in terms of how trustworthy that is going to be, right? And how credible it lends itself to credibility when you have somebody who has walked in your shoes and knows exactly what that's like to be under that amount of pressure and expectation.
I want to ask more questions about this. I'm curious. So, if I was pitching in the World Series and you were my coach, what would
Mhm.
this look like? How would I talk to you? When would I talk to you? Would I talk to you before the game, after the game? Would you like check up on me? Like,
Hopefully well before that actual like
okay.
pinnacle moment on the mound, right, of the World Series. Clearly there's some light strokes things that I could do, but that pitcher is going to be in such a state of arousal that it's going to be really hard to get the new stuff in there at that
Mm,
point, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So I think what it would look like would be like, yeah, a lot of upstream intervention and investment in terms of making sure that we deconstruct any of the maladaptive stuff that could possibly thwart your efforts on that mound when all the pressure's on. But then, yeah, the way we work with the athletes or the high achieving professionals, it's all about that. It's learning about their state. It's learning about how to manage their state, which obviously requires you build out a toolbox of strategies that we now predictably see work, quote unquote, quote unquote. So there's some proof and evidence there that we're going to be able to rely on when we reach for it when the pressure's on. So it's a lot of that in terms of teaching us how to get into the right state for game day. And then it's really working on how you're going to sustain that and how you're going to recover that in terms of your bounce back rate. Because surely it's not a perfect linear thing, high performance. you gotta
mm-hmm.
you gotta know how to take a hit, right? And like get
Right.
back up on your skates like that. So yeah, I think yeah, it's the subconscious mind. You can affect all of this from that depth, from that level of depth, if you're just doing it a couple of times, right? We call this the mental gym. It's the same disciplines that that athlete would need to engage in when training their physiology, right?
Mm,
There's lots we
mm-hmm.
got to do to prepare. There's lots we got to do to stay consistent. And there's also lots we got to do to recover so that we actually can show up and fully engage the next day or the next game. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm going to
it look
turn my
like.
attention to professionals here in just a moment, but I do want to hit on this athlete
Yeah.
thing a little more. So if let's just say I pitched that game in the World Series, I got shellacked, right? Like I feel like my world is crumbling.
Mhm.
I talk to you. Perhaps what's like the first thing you're going to tell me?
Well, I know that high achievers, they see anything less than perfect as failure, which elicits shame, right? Which is what oftentimes will send them into a tailspin because they're not controlling the external validation of the win. So I think that's the first place that we would go, right? Is in unpacking the beliefs in and around why you're feeling that way so that we know exactly what it is we need to affect change on, which is your perspective of what all of that even means.
Mm,
For me, the pivot would be into a conversation around how that's feedback, not failure, right? Like the first and foremost, there's all kinds of amazing opportunities for positive reinforcement. Yes, even when you don't perform optimally or to your expectation.
hmm
So, and I think that again is classic high achiever, right? Is like we get skip right over the good stuff and we go right to the problems, the mistakes, and the failures. And so I like to balance the scales in one's perspective because when we actually take time to check, vet, and validate that which did go well, that's what actually builds self belief. When we have self belief present, that's confidence. And when we're confident, now we can have a conversation about not the failure, right? But the opportunities for growth that were showing up on the play,
mm,
which are vital, critical aspects of how we maximize our performance potential, right? Is that if we don't cash in on all those feedback chips, like where do we have to grow?
mm.
We don't. All we can do is go down, right? That slippery slope. So I think it would be in pivoting your mindset in and around how you were filtering the experience that you just had.
Yeah, I consider myself a high achiever. We're gonna get into that in just literally 1 second.
Hmm.
Because I'm hitting on something you just said, kind of focusing on like the negative, right? Like kind of like go back to baseball, if you will. I go 3 for 4 at the play, I get 3 hits. I'm thinking
Hmm.
about that one that I didn't get a hit. It's like, what did I do wrong there?
Mhm,
You just kind of hyper focus on the one negative or the one
mhm,
thing that didn't go your way.
mhm,
I consider myself a high achiever,
mhm.
but I'm not positive. Am I a high achiever? What's the definition of a high achiever? If people are listening to this are like, I think I'm one, I'm not sure. So, what's like the definition of a high achiever?
I like to say high achiever lives their life outside in, and a high performer lives their life inside out, right? And what that means is essentially what I was saying a second ago. High achievers are the ones who run on scarcity. It looks like striving to the outside world because we are obsessed with that external validation, right? Woo,
Mm,
pedal to the metal is what looks like success to the outside world, striving, striving, striving. But on the inside, that's actually hyper arousal. That's not motivation, even though we think we're all jacked up and motivated. This is me when I would go out and I was like all pumped up. I'd hit the ice. My first shift, I'd be anxious, not motivated. I'd take a bad penalty. My coach would bench me. Like, clearly, it's not a high performance state because all of that is a super compensation for the scarcity, right? For just how deficit we actually feel on the inside in our relationship with self. So, high achievers, the deficit that they classically run on is not good enough, right? That's their core belief about themselves, is that inherently they're not good enough on the inside. So, they need to super compensate, right? And outsource that power to the world, giving the world the power to validate if we're good enough or not. And that's why results like that, when they're less than perfect, can open up and elicit such a shame response because shame is what we feel when we're in that unworthiness.
I'm a high achiever.
Yeah. So I have so much love for my high achievers because you know what? It comes from such a good place.
Mm,
It comes from a place where we really value excellence. We really care about how we show up in the world and we want to make it count. We want to have an impact. It comes from the right place. It's just, And this is the reality that nobody be talking about, I feel like, except us here at Team Elite, which is the fact that all of that scarcity and high achievers experience is trauma informed.
Mm-hmm.
All this super compensation that we do in our perfectionism, our people pleasing, our caretaking, putting everybody else's needs ahead of our own, all that self-sacrifice, right, that we're doing, these are actually trauma responses.
Mm.
And that's why we can't let go of that track, even though we start to realize in our mental health and our physical health, on some level, it is killing us. But we can't let go of our need for achievement, because the reality is that is survival. And that's the brain's job. It takes that job very seriously. And so when you see a high achiever, the higher the high achiever, the more trauma they're trying to run away from.
Ooh. Yeah, I'm just thinking how my current work role and other work roles, I've always felt the need to kind of prove myself. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily know that's been needed, but it's almost
Mm-hmm.
like me talking myself into having to prove myself and just putting so much pressure on myself that's probably just not even necessary. Like I feel
Mm-hmm.
like there's probably some pressure to perform from management, from bosses and stuff like that. But I feel like I just ramp it up probably times 10. And then
Mm-hmm.
it's like I got to prove myself, or maybe I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to get let go, or I'm going to get fired, or they're going to find
Mm-hmm.
someone that's more talented than I am, or something. So
Mm-hmm.
that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like ringing in my ears as you're talking about high achievers and trauma and all that stuff. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure that's come from somewhere. I
Mm-hmm.
know my dad is he's a high achiever. He's somewhat of a perfectionist.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe just growing up in that environment, I'm not sure. But I've also had bosses too. I've had some terrible bosses in the past that have probably made me feel that way as well.
Bingo. Mm-hmm.
Is that something you've kind of run into a lot, is
Yeah,
having to prove yourself?
I think that's where it all started for me. You say I was a high achiever since I came out the womb, but that really is exactly where the trauma started for me, right? It's like where we were little kids and we didn't feel seen or heard or valued. And we had to figure out ways to be seen, heard, and valued, right?
Mm,
And that's where we would have to prove that our voice is worth hearing. Like I'm talking as a female who's experienced and battled my way through a lot of that. Um, but yeah, no, I think it starts with always the leader in their model that carries the most weight. And where does that start? In the home, right?
mm,
The ultimate leader, the parent. The parent, and this is because our self concept, our belief systems about who we are or who we're not, or who we need to be to show up in the world with the mask, right? So we can get our needs met by the world. All of that is mostly informed by the model that's carrying the most weight in your home.
mm,
Our parents model self leadership. Their relationship with self is what informs ours the most. Surely, once I went into my schools and I started hearing, oh, I used to say, I want to play for the Boston Bruins in the NHL. And then everyone's like, you're a girl. You can't do that. Right. So clearly, I started to have influences
mm,
in my hockey locker rooms, hockey coaches throwing water bottles at my head, like and teachers, of course. Like I was highly academic as well. Like there was like some 1.0 freaking teachers along the way that reinforced my parents' model, right?
mm,
And
mm.
reinforced that that was the way to be successful. So I think it starts in the home, and then I think it's our environments that really keep that in play.
I was reading your story recently before doing this podcast, and something, I don't know if you can hear the baby crying.
I
Everybody
love
ignore
that
that if you
sound.
hear
It's going to give me the fever if I hear it much longer.
that. But not to get derailed here.
Yeah.
That is where I'm actually going to go with this. I was reading your story, and on your About Me page was something that caught my attention, was like how we were taught growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Mm-hmm.
means a lot to me. I think we were kind of taught similar things, being high achievers and whatnot. We were probably
Mm-hmm.
brought up in somewhat similar environments, especially being with athletics.
I bet.
Um, your mindset has clearly changed from a high achiever to a high performer. Um, what do you see kids these days and in the past being taught, and how are we taught wrong? How are we taught
Mm,
improperly? And me
mhm,
now having a newborn son and
mhm,
going to be that big influence, as you just mentioned, it is important to me that I am aware of what I'm doing, what I'm saying, how I'm a role model, and he's watching me. What are some words of advice and wisdom that you can give me and everybody listening that has kids in their house or is going to have kids in their home one day to kind of rub off on their children, and how we want to teach them properly compared to how we
Mm-hmm.
were taught somewhat improperly growing up?
Mm-hmm. I would say the same thing to you that I say to all my leaders, which is obviously it's game on. You're in the
Mm,
spotlight now. You're very much aware of the level of responsibility that you have, the level of influence that you carry. There's no more high pressure, high stakes than that. And so like I say to my corporate leaders, I don't even let my leaders work on how they're impacting their people until they understand how they're doing that in their self-leadership. So that's the counsel. And I think where the lessons of that were incorrect, perhaps in my parents' modeling, right? It was a lot of the era of, and I have so much respect for our parents. They grew up in depressions and post World War II, and it was legitimate scarcity for a lot of these folks. So I've studied my inheritance of trauma to know enough about the fact that I have a lot of compassion for it. It does come from the right place. When my dad said to me, 99%, what happened to the 1%, Susan?
mm,
He thought he was creating a standard of excellence, right? He
mm,
wanted me to go out the front door and be excellent. That to him was him being the best possible father and leader that he could be for me. But when we really break that down, now that we have access to things like psychology and neuroscience and mindset, our parents didn't have access to any of that either. But now we can see, right, that that does create an inherent sense of unworthiness. If we believe that we're only as good as our latest A or 100% or my latest point on the board or my latest shift or how much ice time I got, that naturally is telling your child that they, on some level, are not good enough as they are.
mm, mm,
I think this is also the era of kids are to be seen and not heard. So I had a lot of that in my home, which is why when I went to my brother's hockey games as a smart little achieving girl, I looked at parents A in the stands with all the attention being placed on B, my brother on the ice, that C, this girl right here was going to get in some equipment and get on that ice, right? Because that was a way to be seen as
mm,
excellent.
mm,
But I think it's the same things I talk about to my people now, my leaders now, right? Is like there's no psychological safety if you're not seeing and hearing your people. And if there's no psychological safety, there's no trust. And if there's no trust, there's no possibility of curating a high performance team. And that is the biggest thing that I really, really challenge and discipline myself to hold myself accountable to with Brooklyn is that no matter what, my number one priority is maintaining that. Is that I always say to her, baby girl, I'm never going to be angry when you come to me and you tell me you made a mistake or you messed up or you got into a little trouble. I'm always just going to ask curious questions because I just want to understand the choice. And
love
that's
it.
it. Like to me, I need access to that, right? Like that's
Mm,
what happens with my corporate leaders when they're destroying psych safety because they're leading in these high fear, low trust ways, right? Is that it just eradicates any possibility of that vulnerability, right? Of that transparency. And if I can't catch a sight line on what's going on in my business or with my kid, I'm not a leader.
mm,
I
mm,
don't have influence, right? So I think that's a lot of what I now see in my upbringing, I didn't have, right? It's like I didn't have emotionally aware or intelligent parents. My dad worked 7 days a week running a family business, like, and my mom was running around with 3 kids. So I get it. I get it. I'm a mom now. I get it. It gets busy.
mhm.
But I have such deep appreciation now for talking about mistakes and normalizing all of that and continuing to ask for the feedback, right? And like doing these types of things that now, yes, I've learned how to do. But the most important thing that I work on with her, I'll tell you the truth, Brian, is just really that model carries the most weight principle. I want to challenge myself every day to create a model of possibility for her to grasp onto. I want to show her what is possible when she lives her life in this way where she actually is in self leadership, getting her needs met, like actually having boundaries, and not
That's
like
amazing.
peddling to the meddling like I've described. But yeah, I think for parents, I think that's the thing that will carry the biggest punch in terms of your impact and influence on your kids is just the way you are in your self leadership.
That's amazing. That's just amazing awareness, amazing insight. Hitting on the parent thing just a little more. Do
Hmm.
you catch yourself saying anything, or do you hear anybody saying anything that makes you cringe? Like, ooh, like that's like the ultimate no-no. Like, don't say that to a kid. Is there anything that comes to mind that we should perhaps catch ourselves from saying to our children that we've always heard
Yeah.
growing up?
Yeah, I feel like and it's so interesting because there's all this Jordan Peterson stuff coming out now about
Mhm.
how he's like telling well, kids are bad. You put them in the silo in the corner until they come and act right. Please don't shame your kids for their feelings. Like
Right.
that's the number one thing that makes me cringe is when parents get angry with their kids for having kids can't self-regulate, or
Mhm.
they get angry with their kids because their kids aren't being thoughtful and aware of their parent, or they don't have empathy yet. They're kids. They're focused on survival. That's the state of maturation that they're at. Their social self doesn't come until they're like at my daughter's sort of stage and age.
Mhm.
But that's the number one thing when I see that, and I see that a lot, and it's crazy that I still see it as much as I do, right? Because like I feel like there's enough info. We're in the information era. There's surely enough information out there for us parents to learn about the do's and don'ts in 2024. But that one, I think it probably triggers me because it cuts so close to the jugular of my trauma.
Yeah, it's also like I don't know, I think people are just so old school still. They're afraid to change, they're afraid to revolve. It's funny you say that because, my son is 6 weeks tomorrow and
Hmm.
he cried a lot, right? As a newborn, they cry a
Hmm.
lot. I make
Hmm.
jokes and I kind of caught myself saying it because I'm like, there's no crying. There's no crying in
No
this
crying in
house,
baseball.
right? There's no crying in baseball. And it's funny because like I'm just joking around, but at the same time, if he
Yeah.
really understood that, I kind of want there to be crying in this house. Like if he needs to
Mhm.
cry, you're okay to cry. And so it's
Mhm.
after a few times of saying that, it was like, you know what? That's actually not the household I want to have. I want him to be able to
Mm.
cry if he feels like he's going to cry. And so I kind of caught
Mm.
myself saying that. Maybe I would say it again jokingly at some point, but I want to be
Mhm.
aware of stuff like that. Like, no, actually, this is a house of emotion. This is a house to be vulnerable and just be honest. And I want to connect on that wavelength with my son and kind of like
Mm.
what you're doing with your daughter. So really appreciate you sharing
Mhm.
that.
Love it. Honestly, I love that so much because you're really exemplifying the only goal that we really need to own coming off of this interview. If you're a parent listening, just mindfulness, just trying to be consciously aware and calibrating some of where maybe you say things unintentionally, but you see that the impact is definitely not the intention that you had. I think one of the things that parents fear the most, and this is leaders as well, is they're really afraid of admitting when they make those mistakes as parents because
Hmm.
again, they're like, game on. It's so much pressure. Everything I do is influencing them and their model of possibility, right? Is like, and I think sometimes we really miss opportunities to create even deeper levels of psych safety and trust, which is when I mess up, because I do. I am not a perfect parent because that doesn't exist. I also am very, very quick to catch that in my mindfulness and to go circle back and make a repair.
Mm.
And that is also something that I feel like, goes so far in terms of giving them permission to not be perfect little humans and to have emotions like we were just talking about.
Mm. Very
Right.
true. I'm
So,
I'm I'm glad you circled back to that because that was actually supposed to get a hit on is like I don't want to be seen as a superhero to my kid.
mhm,
I'm not.
mm-mm,
Like I realize I'm probably his biggest influence, me and his mother, but I don't want to be seen as a superhero. I just want to be seen as a human who's trying to do the best I can every day. That's
mm,
all I want. And so like I think
mm,
as kids we're just kind of I don't know, taught or if it's just born in us to see our parents as these kind of like unbelievable beings and I want to strive to be like them. I
I
don't
think
really
it's the
want that. And unless I am striving to be the best I can, then I do want my son to be to strive the best that he can. Not,
mhm.
I don't need him to emulate me. I just want him to be the best that he can.
I think it comes from that old school perfectionist model, where it's like we used to see our parents on a pedestal because they would put themselves on a pedestal. It was
Yeah.
part of the power over strategy. I'm the authority, which kind of suggests I know it all, right?
Hmm.
Which kind of suggests I don't make mistakes.
Yeah.
Like it's really just like leftover byproduct of some of that perfectionist strategy.
And as we dive into kind of like parenting, I'm really seeing a parallel now with like leadership and in the professional space. And something I kind of want to circle back to was like,
Mhm,
you work with professionals that are blocking themselves or have blockage
mhm,
from getting to a leadership role. You
mhm,
mentioned that. I want to talk about some of those
mhm.
blockages that
Blockages.
are, yeah, what are the common ones that we need to be aware of?
Well, I feel like we've already been riffing on one of them, which is imposter syndrome.
Yep, I want to hit on that.
I know you do because I can smell some of it in the air today,
Yeah.
right? Which is again very, very, very classically high achieving. I mean, that was me my first year at Princeton, where I like came from being one of the top recruited athletes in the world, grades good enough to get into an Ivy League school. And then all of a sudden I'm bench rider of the century with slivers up my butt. And I did not know how to handle that, let's just say. And then I'm in the classroom full of the world's smartest kids, and I can't even raise my hand because I'm so intimidated. So I'm very passionate about this subject, and I see it. It's classic outside in strategy. We don't see ourselves. We're not in relationship with ourselves. We're outsourcing that to the world, right? We've given the world the power to determine who we are, who we aren't, how good or not good we're doing, right? And all of that creates massive imposter syndrome because in all of that outside in strategy, do you think we ever catch up to who we are?
Mm,
No,
no.
because the locus of control is in the hands of everybody else,
Uh-huh.
right? So I definitely think it's a lot of that. And I'll say, especially with my females, right? Because we're battling coming out of our previous generations' conditioning about where women belong in society and the roles that we're supposed to play. And there's just a lot of that. Who am I to be a leader? I'm a
Mm,
mom. Who am I?
mm, mhm,
That would be the most classic example. And then the other one that I see that I'm really passionate about disrupting is the fact that, yeah, like there's no, on average, the average leader doesn't even get leadership development and training opportunities until 10 years in the leadership role,
wow,
right? So it's
wow.
like, I'm really passionate about getting high achievers to see themselves as leaders first because they're leading themselves as they're climbing that career trajectory. But also just not to wait again for the world to give it to you and deem you worthy of it, right? But it's the second you decide that that is your aspiration, then you also got to be disciplined to do the work. Just like an athlete doesn't say, I want to be a pro athlete and then never goes to the gym. Like, I think we're busted up in our associations about, investing in ourselves. I especially disproportionately see that with my women because they think about everybody else's needs first, right? Before their own. And that's so selfish to spend money on themselves. But
You need to talk to my wife.
this is for all my women out there. The best investment you could ever make is in your damn self. Like this is the through line in our conversation today, isn't it? Is that
Mm,
it's I don't care what area of performance it is. Big corp, executive, entrepreneur, leader, high achieving professional, athlete, or parent.
mhm,
It's all self leadership, right? So it
mm.
all requires development. But yeah, I'm really passionate about just like really getting that message out as far and wide as I can. And then I would say the third one that I see the most is just that, when we get to the top in terms of even being considered for leadership roles, we're so used to oftentimes being these like wicked all-star individual contributors. We own everything. We're used to driving all the excellent results and getting the validation that comes with it. But when you become a leader, it's a totally different skill set that's required because you're no longer the person driving the excellent results. Your job is now to create the conditions for your people to do that.
Wow, that's
And
a
if you
good
don't know
point.
how to do that, right, because your strategies require you to survive in external validation ways, then surely that you're not even going to be seen as a potential for that role.
Okay, there's a few things I want to hit on. Something that's popping into my mind right now is I feel like so you've evolved from a high achiever to a high performer. Is that a fair statement? That's
Yeah,
correct.
I'd like to think so. I mean, it's a journey that never
That was
ends.
my question. Is
Okay,
like,
good.
is that an unlock moment and you're like, okay, boom, I'm a high performer and I now have this mindset moving forward? Or is it a constant struggle that like I have to keep practicing being a high performer? I have to keep these habits and keep showing up for
Mhm.
myself and just like keep these thoughts. It's
I love this
practice over and
question.
over again. Yeah, hit
I
on
love
that.
this question. I have really simple answer for you. As an athlete, do you just like get into peak state of physiology and then all of a sudden you're faked? That wasn't my experience.
Mhm,
I'm
mhm.
trying to get back there still with the now that I'm over 40, like no,
Yeah.
it's something I constantly have to challenge myself to work at.
Mm,
And it does ebb and flow naturally as my life ebbs and flows. I'm scaling a business. I have this incredible team of like 14 people I'm responsible for. I'm a mom. Like, that is everything to me. I have all these areas of life that I'm passionate about. So, no, it's not like a perfect thing. Again, perfection does not exist. The supplement here, in terms of the high performance way to view this, is it's progression, not perfection. It's just
mm,
waking up every single day and trying to do your best with the capacity that you have. And when you have the capacity to be a high performer and you have strategies and tools for that and things that you can do to access those states of high performance, why wouldn't you want to get back in that mental gym every day?
mm.
I
That's a
don't
really
like
good
how
point.
I feel when I don't go to the gym. Like to me, I'm like, probably because I've been doing that so long, right? It's like created the opposite associations maybe of the non-athletic person where I'm like, I don't feel myself if I'm not working out.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
now
that's how I am.
that's more my set point is what I would say. Do I have moments of really high pressure? And again, like I said with Brooklyn, I am not the perfect parent. There's parts of this individuation process that are hitting me sideways and waking up things I didn't know that I needed to work on.
Mhm.
I love that though, because every high achiever who's ever made it to a podium, just look at Tom Brady and the many interviews he's given on this subject, right? Is like, how
Mhm.
long does that feeling last? It's not about the outcomes and the achievements. It really isn't. It's about the process, it's about the journey. I want to be doing this until the rocking chair.
Mm. What was your moment of clarity? Did you have a moment, or was there moments, or what
Mm.
do you draw this back to where you're like, hey, I'm a high achiever. Like, I need to shift something.
I think it was that really cataclysmic brick wall moment that I had my first year at Princeton because on some level, like that had been the North Star since I got into hockey, when I was like, I want to go to the NHL. No, you can't, you're a girl. And I looked at my
Mm.
dad, I'm like, what can I do? And he was like, well, you can get a scholarship to one of these fancy schools in the US. And I was like, great, that's what I'll do, And so here I was, I thought I made it, like again, the high achiever. Yes, I'm in, like, oh, I get to feel amazing. And then all of a sudden, I went from the highest I've ever felt to the lowest I've ever felt because I'm bench riding, can't get my validation that way. I can't raise my hand. So now all of a sudden I'm getting C's and D's for the first time in my life. That's quite disruptive for a high achiever experience. And then my dad, who had planted the North Star seed in my subconscious mind, suddenly got diagnosed with cancer and passed away my first year.
Mm.
And
Wow.
I think it was that combo, right, that had me in enough of a chokehold with this stuff where I was like, for the first time in my life, the most primed I've ever been to have a professional even talk to me about my emotions. Like, you couldn't come near me with a 10-foot pole previous to that to get me to look at those things because I was needing to be in control, you know? And when
Mhm.
I went and I learned about these things and I developed these strategies and I saw like it was very, very noticeable like how impactful this was because I went from bench rider of the century my first year to being one of the leading scorers my second year on the first lineup. I went from
Wow.
C's and D's my first time in my life to being on the national dean's list. Like that was the moment, Ryan, where I was like, and I'm a highly intuitive spiritual person, but that's when I had that knowingness in my intuition. Like, okay, this little blue collar kid from Mississauga, nobody even in my family went to university. Like, it's not lost on me that this all happened when I'm at this fancy institution that has resources to keep me in the game. I was like, but that's bullshit. And I need to get out into the trenches and I need to, like, again, shout this from the rooftops as far and wide as I can, because it's criminal that we're not taught this in school. It's criminal that they don't teach any of this in the MBA. 10 years in a leadership role, and they're responsible for so much. Do you know how much they impact people's mental health? It's like, how are we, it's like sending our teenagers out on the road without a driver's license. Like, what are we doing? So to me, that was the moment of clarity, right? Where I was like, the rug had been pulled out for me. I really used my dad as like clearly to orient my, where do I go? What is success? Where am I going to get seen as excellent, you know? And when that was taken away, I had no compass. So it was this divinely intervened moment for me to actually be like, what do I want? And what is important to me? You know, and I don't think I even had the access point prior to that level of pain and adversity.
And that's okay. Cause I think a lot of, I don't know. I think a lot of people think by the age of like 18, they have to pick their major. They have to know what they want to do in life and their passion and all that stuff. And I don't know. I think something else I do want to tell my kid is like, it's okay if you don't know. You're still
I didn't
super
know.
young.
I
Yeah.
did not know. It
And that's
had to
okay.
happen for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. No, I mean, I'm the anomaly. I'm the exception to the rule. I'm very, very aware of that. And I do speak about that a lot, right? Because I think the expectations that are put on these younger folks is just ridiculous. And again, we're not even setting them up properly, so shame on us.
Yeah.
But I do think, I mean, I oftentimes don't see my clients come to this table until they're 40. They're having
Mm.
kids, right? Or they're in getting access and the pressure. But to me, I'm just like, oh, I wish, I
Yeah.
wish, I wish that we were planting some of these seeds proactively upstream, you know, but career transitioning and finding your purpose, which is something I'm getting a lot of clients coming to me looking for these days. Yeah, I just feel like first and foremost, less than 1/3 of adults even make it to that stage in their maturation process, known
Wow.
as self-authorization, right? And what
Wow.
I'm describing, less than 1/3. The other 2/3 gets trapped in the social self, right? Which is this stage that my kid is in clearly, and is that teenage time where it's like, now it's not just about survival and getting my basic needs met. Now it's about social survival, right? Acceptance and belonging in my social tribe. But that's where most adults get stuck because they create those maladaptive strategies, people pleasing, right? Everything we were talking about a second ago. And then it gets reinforced because people like them and they're accepted and they belong places. But no, I think, listen, this is back to why I say it's a journey. Love the journey. It's not a destination. And I think celebrate any moment where you actually get on this path, no matter what age you are. I don't think it's ever too early to start working on these things. You've heard me talk about how I integrate this in the home with Brooklyn, and I've done that
Hmm.
since a very early age with her. And now when we're working with leaders in the sport community, we're trying to inspire them to like just see this as like a baseline of responsibility that they also need to teach and train alongside these physical skills. But it's never too late either. I have one client who came to me last year who's in her 70s. And I'm just like, I love that.
Yeah.
I
Ab-
Yeah, that
Growth
inspires
mindset.
me.
Growth mindset doesn't need an age.
Nope.
Something I think you have experience with this. I'm assuming this is knowing that I have a mindset that I constantly have to prove myself.
Mhm.
I yo-yo. I go up and down with the power of saying no.
Mm,
I feel this is something you encourage people, especially in the workplace, is
mhm,
the okay and the authority to say no.
mhm.
What are your thoughts on those two letters and how powerful they could be?
Well, I think it's everything, right? Because if you're not saying no and you're not setting healthy boundaries, then where does that leave you? Right? In super
Hmm.
compensation mode. And as we've explored on this podcast, that surely is not sustainable. And I also think that that is very reckless of a leader to model that for their people. This is why burnout has never been more rampant in human history than it is today, right? Is because
Mm-hmm.
it's this all or nothing culture that we live in here in North America, where we just have completely unhealthy expectations about what is actually, yeah, responsibly possible in a given workday. And I think that is some of why people have such a hard time saying no, right? Is because they are so afraid of losing that acceptance and belonging and being seen as good enough, right? If it's based on survival, then that would be life or death saying no.
Mm-hmm.
But
So
I think
true.
the difference, the power of saying no in a nutshell, Ryan, is the difference between surviving and thriving.
Mm.
It's the
Wow.
difference between, I think, unsustainable performance, right, and peak performance.
2 letters, super powerful. Thank you for
Mm-hmm.
breaking that down. That really gives a lot of clarity to that. Here's another
Mm-hmm.
really simple question.
Mm-hmm.
Can high achievers be happy? Can they find happiness? Or do they need the evolution to kind of transition into a high performer in order to find
Mm-hmm.
happiness?
I would almost flip that back on you and say, like, how easy is it for you to access a happy state given these strategies? But I'm not going to put you on the hot seat. You're not on my podcast.
I'll do a solo episode on that
Here's,
question.
yeah, exactly. Here's my download. Like and I'll only speak about this from my own experience because I don't think it's fair to speak on everybody else's behalf. But to me, you got to break down what causes happiness in terms of that neurochemistry.
Mm,
And the quickest route we know in neuroscience to happiness is the attitude of gratitude, right? It's an appreciative state. It's an abundance mindset. And so high achievers, we run on scarcity, meaning I'm not good enough, therefore it's never good enough. And we know it's never good enough because every single morning when we wake up, we get launched from the cannon and got to do it all over again.
mm,
Woo!
mm-hmm.
And by the way, that's scarcity in your nervous system. So that is depleting your capacity to even be able to achieve that type of neurochemistry in terms of happiness, right? Or maybe you experience it in little tiny drips, drabs, and doses. Like we said, Tom Brady surely in his interviews ever felt better than when he won his 4 Super Bowl. But then you interview the guy the next day, and what is he saying? The bottom
Mm,
fell out. He has to start all over again.
mm,
So that's, I think maybe we experience moments. I was happy when I got into Princeton, like I was happy when I got down to the States or when I won a game. There was moments of happiness along the way, surely, because I was getting that it's good enough validation.
right.
But there's a difference between the quality of that happiness and the quality of happiness that comes from actually knowing that it's enough and actually being able, therefore, because I have a belief that it's enough, to see all the evidence in my life that proves that that is true.
Is
And
that what
then,
you do as a coach? You kind of open up people's eyes to kind of like take a look around and kind of see what you have and be grateful for everything that you have. Is that kind of part of your job as a coach to awaken people?
yeah, I mean, it is my job, right? Like it's
Yeah.
beliefs.
Yeah.
You're talking about beliefs. Beliefs are what control our neurochemistry in terms of the things that trigger us to feel the ways that we do.
Mm,
And so if my client doesn't have a belief system that's even going to allow them to access proof and evidence of the fact that it's enough, right? And to give them access to that feeling of happiness that comes with that, then obviously I have to challenge those belief systems, right? Yeah, I think that's what mindset coaching is.
it's crazy. The older I get, it's like every day mindset gets more and more important for how you see your life and just perspective because
Yeah.
someone could have my exact life and be miserable because they can focus on the things I don't have or the
Hmm.
things that they think took too long in life or whatever.
Hmm.
And someone else could have my exact life and be the happiest person on the planet. Like, look at everything that I have. It's 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 truly remarkable how much mindset controls everything.
It's all
Literally
perspective.
everything. It
Your
is all
beliefs,
perspective.
yeah, your beliefs inform your perspective. So how that works, Ryan, I'll give you 5 seconds to look around my background and find everything yellow.
Hmm.
Now close your eyes. Tell me what you saw that was purple.
I think you had winning the winning book, right? My eyes are closed as I'm reading.
Yeah,
Is
yeah, yeah. Go, go,
is it the
go.
winning book?
Yeah. No, that's blue. But I think
Ah,
we proved that that's a classic Tony Robbins drill that he runs, just to prove how beliefs work, right? Beliefs
mm,
filter out and filter in. So they are the things that actually create our perspective. So we literally will not see that it's enough if we believe it's not enough.
mhm.
That's why beliefs control how much potential you'll realize, how much possibility you will see. That governs everything, right? In
Everything.
terms of the decisions that you're going to make and the quality of emotions that are actually driving those decisions.
It's crazy. I can imagine most of the people you work with that have these blockages, like we're talking about imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome, you can probably boil it down to someone creating a narrative that just doesn't exist, right? Um,
Mm,
where does that come from, and how do we literally how do we change that? I That just takes years and years and years of practice, doesn't it? I mean, I think of these moments where you're on the highway and you get cut off. You can tell yourself a story of that guy is such a dick. I want to go past him, I want to get flip him off, and just,
mhm,
you have these moments of rage. Or you can have a
mhm,
story of, wow, that person, they must be in danger. Or perhaps someone's in their
mm,
car, they got to get to the hospital. I feel so bad. I
mm,
hope they're
mhm,
okay, right? It's just
mhm.
two completely different perspectives.
Perspectives.
How? I just feel like we're wired as people to just that immediate jolt is kind of like negative.
Mhm.
How do we train to see things in a different light? I imagine some of us are better than others at that. And you're the coach, right? I'm just
Mhm.
curious to know what is even like step one to get people on the right path.
I love the question because it's literally what we do, right? As mindset coaches, it's mindset strategy architecture. So it's all about really ascertaining where the broken strategies live in your self leadership, finding the root, which is the belief system, and then being able to deconstruct those belief systems by being able to ascertain where the proof and evidence actually lies in your subconscious mind. A lot of the times, the surface level stuff does not affect change in behavior because it doesn't go that deep. That's the neuro linguistic programming aspect of my work, and why I'm so passionate about that aspect of brain science is because there actually are ways that you can affect change on your belief systems that don't have to take a decade of therapy. That's the number one feedback I get from my clients. I've been in therapy a decade and I got more out of this session than I did in the decade
Wow.
because it's strategic. It's under like our mastery is understanding the lay of the land in terms of how to be able to access the root of what needs to be changed, right? What needs to be challenged again in neuroscientific ways that are actually going to help us reprogram those beliefs with much more empowering, aligned, right? Belief systems.
Do you work with people that feel that I think rage is kind of a hard word here, too harsh of a word. This chip on their shoulder is a benefit and they don't want to get rid of it. They don't want to see
Mm.
things from a positive perspective because the negative is just driving them to go further, faster, stronger.
Well, as I mentioned off the top, we're very passionate here at Team Elite about retiring those 1.0 leaders who hold on to those strategies, right? In terms of leading with fear, which anger and rage and all of that is an example of an old school leader who thinks that's them and their authority.
Yeah.
It's very punitive, right? And so they think it's working, quote unquote. But we know, based on the conversation that we just had, it totally annihilates any sense of psych safety. And if we don't have psych safety, Google did that whole wonderful bit of research around Project Aristotle, where they proved that psych safety is the biggest predictor of a high performing team.
Mm.
So the rage, I get it. I used to play with the chip on my shoulder too. Right? Because I obviously had no idea what was going on with my emotions. And that was one of those hyper arousal states that I thought were getting the job done on the ice, you
Exactly.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I also then started to realize in my maturity that that wasn't going to take me very far because the first time I did that at Princeton, I got benched. And then there I was like, oh my God, I finally got on the ice. And now I'm so jacked up thinking I'm motivated, so jacked up that I go boom right off the first shift and I hit a girl. And then now I'm in the box and now I'm on the bench and now I'm not going to see the ice for another couple of weeks if I'm lucky. So that catches up to you. I think this day and age, you can't get away with being a ragey boss for very long because there's like social media and they're going to be creating memes about you. And the level of accountability obviously is the most that it's ever been from that perspective. But yeah, I mean, I know that still exists clearly in our
Yeah, I was gonna say,
world.
would you say there's a slight benefit to that? You've brought up Tom Brady a few times, which I'm a
Mhm.
more of a Peyton Manning guy, but we'll go with Tom
Yeah.
Brady.
Okay.
Are you a Patriots fan by the way?
I went to school in New England, so I
Yeah,
feel
so
like
he's at the Bruins.
osmosis
So
made me.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, then I'm sure you
Yeah.
know the story because he was
Yeah.
picked in what, the sixth round or whatever, right? And he
Yeah.
kind of plays with that chip on his shoulder about getting passed up
Mhm.
by all these quarterbacks and all these teams that just didn't
Mhm.
take a chance on him. And he played with this. And I think that's kind of glorified. I think everyone's like, oh, he's got this chip on his shoulder. He's going to show them. Is there a
Mhm.
place in sports for that? Or is that something kind of like, you can achieve to this level without that?
Mhm. Well, I think in the context of sports, you actually need a certain level of strength, right? And physicality, where sometimes it does work, quote unquote, or serve you to use that physicality to catch the beat on somebody. I
Hmm.
think what we're talking about is in a business context. Does that even make sense? I don't think in a business context it's ever okay for a boss to get ragey and angry on their people.
Hmm.
Because how does it make people feel?
Pretty terrible.
And that's the
Yeah.
problem, right? Is like how my partner on the co-host, whom you've met, Rob, he just did a TED
Hmm.
talk on asshole bosses, and the stats on that are insane. But I'll let him speak to that. Yeah, I think again, it impacts people's mental health so much, but it also impacts engagement. And we know if you don't have engagement, again, you're not a leader. What exactly do you think you're doing? Because those troops aren't following you. You lose your influence if you start to act in those types of punitive ways.
Hmm. And so that leads me to kind of this question. I'm not going to keep you forever, but I could. Um, my wife just got promoted, which is
Hmm.
amazing. She's a great worker. She's also, I'll admit it, she's a high achiever like me.
I had a
Um,
feeling.
yep, she's a high
Takes one
achiever
to
like
love
me.
one and know one, right?
We commiserate on occasion,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
she just got a promotion and she's going to be now managing two others. She's been a
Hmm.
manager before, so I'm not concerned about that. But knowing that somebody is now in a management role,
Hmm.
what is perhaps like the number one trait? If I were to go to her, hang up this Zoom call that we're having and say, hey, so and so this said this is a great trait for a manager to have, what would
Hmm.
that be?
I think it's to lean in and really get to know your people before asking them to do anything.
Hmm.
Right? And not just like the surface level stuff. This is the human centric approach, right? So it's like really, really getting to not only see and hear your people, but understand who your people are as human beings, not just in the work context, but holistically, right? When people aren't going to care about what we're asking them to do until they know how much we care about them.
Hmm.
They're
Hmm.
not going to care about your mission and your vision and your strategies. I think the most important entry point for any new leader is to create a baseline of that trust and that rapport because your people actually not only hear that you care, but feel it. That's
Hmm.
why empathy is one of the top rated leadership skills of them all right now is because it carries so much weight in this 2.0 way because when you get to know your people and you understand your people at that depth then you know what is important to them. When you know what's important to them, you know how to motivate them, you know how to
Hmm.
inspire them, you know how to lift their spirits when they've had a bad day or bad performance or whatever, and then you can make sure that their values align with yours, right? That you're setting in terms of the team leader, and then that all that ladders up to the bigger picture stuff
That
of the
means
organization.
that means everything, honestly, for a leader. It's like, you get some of those coaches that you want to run through a wall for, and some of them are like, F you,
That's
like,
it.
I'm not doing that. I don't want to play for you,
Exactly. Yep.
What are your thoughts on playing to someone's strengths versus building up their weaknesses? Do you ever talk about that at all?
Yeah, I think like that's the starting point, right? Is like we want to make sure that you see yourself, which is the antidote to imposter syndrome. not giving that, outsourcing that expertise to the world to inform, but you actually, again, stepping to the helm in your self-leadership, becoming the expert in you, which really means first and foremost, when I was sitting riding pine with slivers up my butt, I had to learn to connect with what I actually had inside that I brought to this table that was valuable. It was like I thought that all of that evaporated overnight. I didn't see myself, so I didn't even know, oh my God, all that stuff that I got recruited for is still in me.
Mm.
So it starts with intrinsically validating the value that we have to bring to the table, because that's the ground on which we stand when we show up in that room. And then it's being hungry for the opportunities for growth. That's the growth mindset, right? Is like we always have an appetite for finding our edges, because we know that is what it's all about at the end of the day. It's not about competing with everybody else. A high performer, in a nutshell, competes with themselves. They compete with their own potential every single day. We said progression, not perfection, which is the goal is now to do my very best each and every day with the capacity I have. When I'm sick or my baby's up all night, that might be a little lower than some of these other days where I had a full night's sleep. But as long as I know that is my capacity, then I can actually set my expectations accordingly and then feel a sense of satisfaction at the end of the day, no matter what day it is and what capacity I have.
Do you ever have conversations on people not showing up, not being consistent, and just because I know how important that is, keeping promises for yourself, or like, oh, I'm going to hit the gym today. I'm going to feel good. And then like 5 o'clock rolls around. You're like, not feeling it. And, you always make these excuses, which just drives me insane, because it's like, I don't know, like I feel like showing up, but just being consistent is just so important. The more you do that, the stronger it gets. And then the more you
Yeah.
keep wanting to do that. What do those conversations look like for you, for the people that are just like, yeah, I'm going to do this, and then they just don't show up? Like, how
Yeah.
you can't make someone do that. So what does that look like?
I just think it's the difference between a high achiever and a high performer. Again, like a high achiever, like I described, is like obviously a massive avoider. They're
Mm,
really good at compartmentalizing their needs and bargaining with themselves. I call that the escape trap door that you were just describing a second ago, right? Which is like, I know that I'm going to show up and deliver when I need to prove my worth. But when it comes to all these other things that I want to do, or I should do, or maybe I need, but it's for me, so whatever, nobody's holding me accountable. Nobody's going to see that, right? Like all these other
mm,
things that obviously we don't value as much, we become really good at that, finding that escape trap door and bargaining with ourselves, right? So the lesson on this in terms of the high performers, the high performer knows that this strong foundation on self that they stand on, which everything else depends, because literally every single choice I make about my career, about my people, about my money, about my motherhood, about my health, it all filters through my relationship with self.
mm.
So I think that's where it begins, is we understand that we can't do any of that externally until we're having that level of trust and psych safety with ourselves. And that means that we're not only seeing ourselves, right, but we're being honest with ourselves, and we're actually staying in our integrity, meaning that just like when I say to Ryan, I'm going to be there for the pod, you can count on me. Now I'm going to show up because he's counting on me. I hold myself to the same standard,
I
you
love that.
know?
I love it. It
Yeah.
reminds me of a clip in the sports realm of Kobe Bryant. I remember running into a few times. I've seen it a few times where at the end of the season, he apparently made like a schedule of what the summer is going to look like. And there's a lot of
Mhm.
training, a lot of working out, getting up at like 3 a.m. and all that kind of stuff. Right. And he's like, there's just days I don't want to do that, but I don't negotiate with myself. He said, I made a contract with myself. I don't negotiate. I just show up, and I got to do that. And I saw that
Mhm.
probably 5, 6 years ago. And it's just like something that has stuck with me since, is like, I don't negotiate with myself. And
There's a lot
I
of
just,
power in that,
yeah.
because like what that actually parlays into is that now I know that I trust my commitments. And when I trust the commitments I make to myself, I can pretty much set any goal and already infer that I'm going to reach it. There's
So
a
what do you do for the
power to
people
that.
that what do you do for the people that just struggle with that? What's step one to get someone to show up for the commitments just a little more? What do you do? What do you say?
Well, you hire a coach first and foremost, who's going to hold you accountable. I mean,
Accountability partner for sure.
this is where it all began for me, and why I chose psychology instead of or coaching instead of going into sports psychology, really, was because that was a model of excellence that I saw through 20 something years clearly helped me realize max potential. I didn't know what was happening behind the play. I didn't know where my edges were. I needed coaches to constantly give me that feedback, lay out my training goals, and then hold me accountable to that, right? So I feel like
Mhm.
for a high achiever, that's where you start. It's like you use what's already working for you. You outsource that, right, to the world in terms of somebody who's going to hold your commitment in place and not let you budge from it. There's so much power just in that decision alone. And then when we actually get into the work, right? I'm a high performance coach, so I'm definitely holding you accountable, or else we can't do this thing. It's not a high performance relationship if we're not in accountability. And then I help you understand the beliefs, the broken strategies that are running interference on your ability to hold yourself accountable. Because that is, again, is beliefs informed, right?
Yeah, I don't want to get into this too far because Kristen's gonna kill me. But like, so my wife, with the greatest intention, sometimes will say something and then she doesn't do it. And that is sometimes leads to our greatest frustration, or my greatest frustration is like, well, you said you were going to do something and you didn't do it.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, why is that a big deal? It's not that big of a deal. The grand scheme of things, it's like not that big of a deal. It's not like
Yeah.
she's left our son at daycare and forgot to pick him up or
No,
whatever.
no, no, no.
Um, but it was like, it's interesting to me. I wish it didn't bother me as much, but someone's word and someone saying they're going to do something, whether it's her or somebody else or a friend like bailing on me or
Matters too.
whatever, it
Yeah.
bothers me way more, it seems like, than the normal person. The normal person
Mhm.
seems to like rub it off and be like, whatever, I don't care. It doesn't mean anything to me anyways. For me, it's like, well, you said you were going to do something. Why didn't you follow through? And I think like from the opposite perspective is like, I have a hard time dealing with that. Like, I don't know how to like input that and not let it bother me. Like, do you ever deal with people like that have my
Yeah, I
perspective?
have I have a question for you.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you when she does that?
It means I love her, Kristen. I love you. um,
We'll always start there.
yeah, well, I'll
But what
start
does it
there.
mean when she doesn't follow through on her word? What does that represent to you?
That's a really good question. I think I have a really hard time sometimes when people act differently than I would. And so I know
Mm.
everybody is different.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody acts differently. The importance or priorities are different than mine. Sometimes I fail to at least immediately kind of see that. And I'm like, well,
Mm-hmm.
it could even be like, somebody pays me back for something, or someone just says, thank you, I appreciate
Mm-hmm.
this, or,
Mm-hmm.
the showing of appreciation. And some people just
Mm-hmm.
like, whatever, they don't even care. And it's like, well, I would
Mm-hmm.
have said thank you or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That's honestly, I don't know. I don't know why it bothers me so much. I think it bothers me because it's like, well, I know I would, if I said something, I'm saying it out loud, which is kind
Mm-hmm.
of like me holding myself accountable, and whoever else heard it, I have to follow through on it. And
Mm-hmm.
so I don't, I really don't know. I feel like there's probably something there we can like dive into. There's probably a therapy session there why it bothers me so
Well,
much. Do you have
or
thoughts on that?
a mindset coaching session, right? Which is
Yeah.
just basically understanding your need to control the way she is.
Mm,
What did we learn today? High achievers need to control the outside to control how they feel inside.
mm,
And so you're needing her to act in the ways that you value and expect. It's largely how high achievers get that locus of control outside of themselves,
mm.
right?
Appreciate
So
that.
it opens up a deficit if she's not acting in those ways that you need her to act so that you can feel in control.
Mm,
Make sense?
appreciate that. And I feel comfortable saying this to you because we've had this conversation, me and her. So it's not like out of the blue to her.
It's probably every relationship out on the block, right?
Mm,
Like how
mm,
classic is that we don't understand that we project our needs onto other people. We don't understand this is how we're trying to seek control in our lives. And again, nobody taught us this in school,
hmm.
Ryan. We didn't
My
get this
life,
game
my life would be
entrepreneurs.
easier if I didn't care. I
Yeah,
like I
no.
realize that. right? I
Mhm.
mean, if I just didn't care what anybody else did with their time, or they said they
Yeah.
did something, they were going to do something, they didn't do it, my life would just be flat out easier if I didn't care, but I do. And
I
it's,
don't think that's the goal either, okay? Remember, it comes from a really good place. It's all
mm,
wrapped up in the right stuff, right? But it's a super compensation. So going to the other side of the pendulum surely is not the solution, right?
mm,
Because
mm.
if you didn't care at all about people, you'd be a narcissist or a sociopath. We're on a mission, Ryan, to try to heal all of that. No, it's just like being somewhere in the middle. Like, obviously, you care about your wife so much and you love her so much. And I think I have to be very self aware so that I don't, I have really obviously high standards and I value excellence. That's where this whole interview began. But I can't project that onto my kid or project
Mm.
that onto my friends or project that onto my partner. Or my team, right? Like I have to be very self-aware in terms of, okay, well, that's how I operate. But let me understand how you operate. And then if you ask me for help in terms of making that better, in terms of your follow through, then surely I'll support you.
Mm.
But I know it's not my responsibility to parent my partner or my team or my, right? And I think that that's sometimes when we haven't reached that self-authorization stage of the maturation process, we're just not operating that way yet, right? It's like we're still trying to get our needs met outside in.
This has been a super informative and very insightful conversation. This is
I'm so
amazing.
happy. I'm
Um,
so happy.
Final question for you. Make it as quick as you would like.
Mhm.
When you wake up in the morning, and I don't know, I like to emulate smart people and people that kind of have it together more than I do. And you certainly seem like you're one of those
I
people.
don't know about that. Yeah.
But what is something you tell yourself, or what is something that you do every day that's just a staple in your routine that makes your life better, makes your mental mindset stronger? Just give us a nugget of something that you do.
It might surprise you. I know there's a lot of high performance people in the space talking about like the 5 minute journal and like all these
Mm.
things that you have to do in your lineup as you get set for the day. But I start within. Like I just, it's all about the self leadership piece for me. And so I know the way I start my day is the biggest predictor of how that day is going to play out. I know that my autopilot is a ferocious beast. 95 to 97% of my choices, bam, 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 all day are just going to be coming from my autopilot. And there's a momentum to that, right? A ripple effect. So the first place I start is in my self leadership. The first place I start is going inside and connecting with myself and what's going on and how I'm feeling and what I need so I can make sure, right, that I am on solid ground before I even go to Brooklyn, before I even sit down with my first client or my teammates. So the first thing I do is like just doing that little bit of a inner self meditation, right? Where I'm like connecting obviously with my breath to try to get into that meditative state. And then I'm just visualizing her, right? Almost like I would imagine Brooklyn when she's, little kid with
Mm.
needs.
Mhm.
And that just gives me the quickest access point in my relationship with self to having real time data and feedback in terms of whether or not there's some deficits that I need to attend to first. The oxygen mask on me first, right? The age old
Yep.
metaphor. Because I don't think it's responsible leadership for me to be leading from a deficit, right? So I want to
Mhm.
make sure I'm in the integrity of that first thing off the draw.
Love it. Yeah, it's the more I do this podcast, the more I realize I talk to people that kind of just say fill your cup before you fill someone else's from from a deficit. It's super hard to do, and that's
Hmm.
on a positive note. That's something I try to get Kristen to do a lot because it's like I see
Hmm.
how happy she is when she's going out doing things that she loves and she's passionate about,
Yeah,
and she supports
yeah,
me like I'm doing this podcast while she's watching the baby because she sees
yeah,
how happy it makes me, and it just makes everybody happier, more positive,
yeah,
and they get to work on their
totally.
mental health and strengthen their mindset. And
Yeah.
absolutely love that. I love that. Susan, I can have you on for the next 20 hours and you keep diving into stuff. I think this stuff is absolutely fascinating. There's nothing more important than mindset. I honestly believe that because your life could
Amen.
be beautiful or it could be miserable, and depending on you and your mindset, just and how you see things and your perspective. So
Hmm.
absolutely amazing. And you've given 1,000 reasons so far in this last, what, hour and a half to come work with you, to come find you. What an amazing coach. I understand the importance of coaches. I think coaches get kind of like a, I want to say,
Interesting rap.
yeah, a bad rap, kind of like what I need a coach for. It's just like
Yeah.
I'm not an athlete. I'm not playing a sport. What I need a
Mm-hmm.
life coach for. I think
Mm-hmm.
people look at it kind of like that. And
Mm-hmm.
a conversation like this, I think, is pretty enlightening. How you can have someone in your corner and get you to kind of see things that you don't see. And I think getting out of our own way is something we need to do better of. And yeah, how much life could just be flat out better when you just look at things from a different lens, a lens full of
Mm-hmm.
color than black and white. And a coach can definitely help you do
Mm-hmm.
that, especially an experienced one like yourself. And you've gone through it, which is amazing. So I want to give people the opportunity to find you and follow you, and how they can work with you as well.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm blushing again. Honestly, I obviously concur, right? Like the moment that I had access to this stuff and I saw the power that the potential that this holds, it became my life's work. Every single day since that point, I've been on this mission and I've been passionate and fired up and having so much joy along the way as a result. So the place I think is easiest is my website, elitehighperformance.com. You can book a free consult with me there for 30 minutes. There's also our podcast, the Leadership Launchpad Project. That's on every major podcast platform. But I highly suggest booking that consult with me because that's a chance to sit down with me for 30 minutes for free and get just a little bit of a sight line in terms of the playbook that you're running on.
Mm, love it. Yeah, you've already given your value. So I can't wait for people to come and find you and work with you. Just it sounds like an amazing life experience, amazing opportunity, an amazing way to just, like I said, see the world through a different lens. And
Yeah.
you get one of
Game
these.
changer.
Yeah, absolute game
Game
changer.
changer.
Is there anything you're working on you want to talk about, or you just kind of like going on the
Yeah.
podcast and
I
yeah.
mean, we've got a high performance certification program running right now that is an opportunity if you want to learn how to be this type of leader or change maker in your world, whether or not that's with athletes or business people or you're an entrepreneur or within the home as a parent.
Mhm.
Just an ability to learn how to actually do this type of work as a coach. That's something that we're really excited about launching. Yeah, well, it's been launched, but it's something that we have recently revamped and revitalized, and it's the best form it's ever been. So if anybody out there is looking to know how to do this type of mindset strategy architecture, I would highly suggest checking out our high performance certification program.
Amazing. Susan
Also on the
Hobson.
website. I should mention.
Amazing. You're welcome back anytime. Anytime. We can keep
We
talking
got to
about
do
this.
part two.
We'll dive deeper into all this stuff. There's just so many avenues we can go. But for now, I'm so thankful for your time, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.